Hello and welcome back to the Passport to Crime podcast. This is episode 20 and I want to begin by saying thank you. 20 episodes in and you're still here. Whether you've been with us since the very first case or you've just joined us, your presence means everything. You've helped build a space where we don't just consume stories, we honour them. We ask hard questions and we listen with empathy and we hold space for the lives behind the headlines. Today's episode is one of the most emotionally layered cases we've ever explored. It's the story of Gypsy Rose Blanchard, a young woman whose life was shaped by deception, isolation, and ultimately a desperate act of escape. Her case challenges the way we think about victimhood, agency, and the limits of justice. It's not a story with easy answers, but it's one that deserves to be told with care. But as always, before we delve into today's case, a quick disclaimer. This episode contains discussions of medical abuse, psychological manipulation, and violent crime. Listener discretion is strongly advised. If you are sensitive to these topics or have experienced similar trauma, please take care while listening. With that being said, let's delve into today's case. So what was the illusion of illness? Gypsy Rose was born in 1991 in Golden Meadow, Louisiana. From the moment she entered the world, her mother Claudine, Dee Dee Blanchard, began crafting a narrative of illness. Dee Dee claimed Gypsy suffered from leukemia, muscular dystrophy, epilepsy and developmental delays. She told doctors her daughter needed a feeding tube, a wheelchair and a cocktail of medications. But none of it was true. What Gypsy endured was a rare and devastating form of abuse known as Munchausen syndrome by proxy, a mental health disorder in which a caregiver fabricates or induces illness in someone under their care. Dee Dee manipulated medical professionals, falsified records, and isolated Gypsy from the outside world. Their lives were built on lies, and Gypsy was forced to perform her sickness publicly, even as she began to suspect the truth. They lived in a Habitat for Humanity home, received donations, trips to Disney World, and even met celebrities. Gypsy was celebrated as a brave, sick child, but behind the smiles and pink decor was a prison, one where Gypsy's body was healthy, but her autonomy was stolen. Dee Dee shaved Gypsy's head to mimic chemotherapy. She told neighbours Gypsy had the mental capacity of a 7-year-old. She kept her daughter out of school, out of reach, and under constant surveillance. And when Gypsy tried to speak up, she was punished, sometimes physically, often emotionally. This wasn't just overprotective parenting, it was medical abuse, psychological control, and coercive captivity. So now, let's take a look at the crime that shook the narrative. By her late teens, Gypsy began to realise the truth. She wasn't sick. She could walk. She didn't need the feeding tube, and her mother had been lying to her and the world for years. But escaping wasn't simple. Gypsy had no formal education, no access to money, and no trusted adults outside her mother's reach. She began seeking connection online, first through fan forums, then dating sites. In 2012, she met Nicholas Goody John, a man with a troubled past and a fascination with dark fantasy. Their relationship quickly turned intense. Gypsy saw Nicholas as a way out. Together, they planned the murder of Dee Dee. In June 2015, Nicholas travelled to Springfield, Missouri. While Gypsy waited in the bathroom, Nicholas stabbed Dee Dee 17 times in her sleep. The crime was brutal, but it wasn't random. It was the culmination of years of psychological imprisonment. Gypsy and Nicholas fled to Wisconsin, where they were arrested days later. Gypsy was charged with second-degree murder. She pleaded guilty and received a 10-year sentence. Nicholas was convicted on first-degree murder and sentenced to life without parole. The public reaction was divided. Some saw Gypsy as a victim who had no other way out. Others struggled with the morality of the act. But one thing was clear, this wasn't a typical case. It was a tragedy born from prolonged abuse and desperation. So what did it mean reclaiming identity behind bars? During her time at Chillicothe Correctional Center, Gypsy began to speak out. She gave interviews, participated in documentaries, and became the subject of Hulu's The Act. But beyond the media attention, she was trying to rebuild herself. From someone who had been controlled her entire life into someone who could finally make her own choices. She studied psychology, wrote letters to survivors, and began to advocate for awareness around medical abuse. Her story became a symbol, not of crime, but of survival. In one interview, Gypsy said, "I feel freer in prison than I ever did living with my mum." That statement is truly chilling and profound. It speaks the depth of her captivity. She also began to reflect on her relationship with Nicholas. She described it as a toxic and manipulative relationship and rooted in constant fear. She acknowledged her role in the crime, but also the years of grooming and isolation that led to it. Gypsy's time in prison wasn't just about punishment. It was about transformation, about learning who she was outside of Dee Dee's shadow. Now, let's take a look at Gypsy's life after lockup. Gypsy was released on parole in December 2023. After serving 8 years, she returned to Louisiana, reconnected with family, and began navigating a world she had never truly known. In 2024, she married Ken Urker, a pen pal who supported her during her incarceration. Later that year, they welcomed their daughter, Aurora, a name that symbolises new beginnings and light after darkness. She also starred in a reality series called Gypsy Rose Life After Lockup, which documents her journey through freedom, motherhood, and healing. The show has sparked debate. Some see it as exploitive, others as empowering. But for Gypsy, it's a chance to tell her story on her own terms. Still, her release hasn't been without challenges. Public scrutiny, parole conditions, and the weight of her past continue to follow her. She's learning how to parent, how to trust, how to live without fear, and she's using her voice to advocate for survivors of Munchausen by proxy, and to educate others about the complexities of coercive abuse. She also began working with advocacy groups, speaking at conferences, and building a platform that centres survivors' voices. Her message is clear: healing is possible, but it takes time, support, and truth. So now let's take a look at the cultural mirror. Gypsy's case has become a cultural touchstone. It's been dissected in documentaries, dramatised in series, and debated in courtrooms and classrooms. But beneath the spectacle is a young woman whose life was stolen before she ever had the chance to live it. Her story forces us to confront uncomfortable truths like, how do we define justice when the victim becomes the perpetrator? What systems failed to protect her? And how many other gypsies are there, unseen, unheard, and still performing a life that isn't theirs? It also asks us to examine our own reactions. Why are we drawn to stories like this? What does it say about our culture that trauma becomes entertainment? And how can we shift the narrative towards healing, accountability, and prevention? Gypsy Rose's story is not easily categorized. It's painful, complicated, and deeply human. It asks us to look beyond the crime and into conditions that created it. It reminds us that justice isn't always clean, and that survival sometimes comes at a cost. Well, I think that brings us to an end of this episode. Thank you for listening to episode 20 of the Passport to Crime podcast. Your continued support means everything. If this story moved you, challenged you, or sparked conversations, I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can find us on Instagram at the Passport to Crime podcast, and if you haven't already, please like and subscribe. But just before we wrap up, I want to give you a glimpse of what's coming next. On the next episode of the Passport to Crime podcast, we'll be turning our lens toward one of the most iconic and controversial figures in modern history, Princess Diana. We'll be unpacking the scandal that surrounded her, beyond the tabloid frenzy and royal drama, from the infamous recorded phone calls to the explosive Martin Bashir interview that changed everything. We'll explore how Diana's voice was manipulated, how her truth was distorted, and how the fallout still echoes through the monarchy today. It's a story of power, betrayal, and the cost of being the people's princess. So stay tuned, you won't want to miss it. Thanks for listening, bye bye for now, and always keep your passports at the ready for the unknown.